There is finally a minimum wage for Uber drivers and Lyft drivers in Minneapolis. And you can see right away that the Uber and Lyft new driver minimum wage is taking effect on December 1st. At the time of this video, it already happened. So finally, right? Because I've covered this story a lot throughout this year. And I feel like the last video I did about this was in, I think, June or July this year. And you can see right here that the increased pay, let me pause this ad, or can I not pause it? No. Okay. I'll just scroll up here. The new minimum wage for Uber and Lyft drivers already took place. And this is a back and forth thing that was happening almost all year. And here's the main thing, is that drivers will now be paid, which is interesting, $1.28 per mile and 31 cents per minute with a $5 minimum per ride. So that's kind of interesting to me. I'm not going to lie that they're not really focusing on like an exact minimum wage of like X amount an hour. That's what happened in Massachusetts. But they're focusing more on the nitty gritty of the analytics of the ride itself, right? And of course, I think this is a great start to guarantee that this is what they should be getting. In addition, I think this is also a big thing. Drivers will also have the right to appeal a deactivation and possibly reactivate their account. That's also another big thing. And I'm going to talk about this a bit later in this video of my like analysis, but I'm glad that at least this is something that's becoming more popular. We'll talk about that in a second though. But in addition, it's not just that. Ride-hailing companies will also be required to maintain auto insurance on a driver's behalf and are required to provide blanket accident and sickness insurance policy that leaves at least $1 million in benefits for personal injuries to drivers. The companies will also have to pay drivers with wheelchair-accessible vehicles an additional 91 cents per mile and pay drivers 80% of a ride cancellation fee if the driver has already departed and the ride is canceled. And one last thing I want to point out is how much you're getting paid in terms of the time. Because you can see here, the minimum of $1.28 per mile, 31 cents per minute, the $5 minimum. But what does that equate to? You can see right here that this means that a ride that lasts 10 miles and 15 minutes would result in the driver being paid a minimum of $17.45, not accounting for expenses such as gas or wear and tear on the vehicle. And this is huge for a bunch of different reasons. Well, let's start out with the most important one. In my opinion, this happened. I think just the meta perspective, because throughout this year, in case you don't remember or didn't see those videos, didn't hear about this, earlier this year, this got put forward of having a minimum hourly wage and drivers getting the amount that they should be getting and being deserved. And what happened is Uber and Lyft, and they do this all the time. It's very annoying where when, like, say, a law gets put forward or legislation or some protection, especially protection for drivers, whether it's financial or insurance-wise or whatever, they say, you know what? If you pass this, we're going to leave. We're going to leave Minneapolis. We're not going to have Uber and Lyft anymore. You have to find other ride-sharing companies. And it becomes this almost odd game of chicken where counties and areas say, shoot, well, we can't go without Uber and Lyft. Uber and Lyft is a staple now. Should we pass it anyway and see if Uber and Lyft, and kind of call their bluff, does Uber and Lyft stay actually? Or does Uber and Lyft actually leave? Would that actually happen? And this has happened. Uber and Lyft has left some areas, right? So it becomes kind of a game of like cat and mouse or calling their bluff. Becomes annoying, right? And it becomes frustrating as well because it's kind of childish in my opinion. And I've said this before in other videos, that it is frustrating that when an area says, you know what, we're going to pass this new law to make it better for rideshare drivers. And then Uber and Lyft says, oh, you know what, we don't like this. We're just going to leave. Either A, we leave if you pass it, or B, you don't pass it and we stay. And it's like, well, all right, it becomes a bit frustrating. But when it comes to this, one, I'm just glad in general they passed it. Two, those terms I think are pretty good. It's a good start. Now, is it perfect? No, but I think it's a good start. And I think that's something I do want to mention as well, that you look at what's going on in California and then what just happened in Massachusetts. Massachusetts just got the green light for Uber and Lyft unions now. Then you look at what happened, in Minneapolis, right? So the good thing is, I feel like this is another case of that ball continuing to roll and that like line of breadcrumbs becoming more and more apparent of things getting better all around the country when it comes to rideshare drivers. So I think that's the second thing, that I think these terms are pretty decent. They're not perfect, right? Of course, $17.45 for a 10-mile ride that lasts 15 minutes, I think isn't bad. Now, yes, of course, that does not include things like taxes or the wear and tear on your vehicle. It does not count for expenses like, gas and stuff like that, but is a good start. I feel like at least this is a good stepping stone to progress forward from. And then the third thing that I really like about this, as I showed you earlier in that article, is it's not just the minimum wage. They're now bringing up things like deactivation and insurance policies and stuff along those lines. And I think this is actually bigger than most people think. And I'll tell you why, is because I think back in the day when the talk started to happen about Uber and Lyft drivers not getting paid what they should be getting paid, that was just it. It was just the financials. When Uber and Lyft drivers when it started to become more well-known and popularized, if I'd use that word, that drivers don't get treated the best by Uber and Lyft. It's this weird thing. They're independent contractors, but they also kind of get treated like employees. It's this vague thing. The first thing that was talked about was the money. And let's be honest. Yes, that is the biggest thing for most drivers. They're like, hey, I want to get paid the right amount. I want to get paid the amount that I deserve. I have to put food on the table. I'm also taking this huge hit from things being more expensive, like maintenance on my car. I have to pay taxes on this. Uber and Lyft is now taking out a bigger cut. Drivers want to get paid the amount they should be getting paid. Makes sense, right? Definitely makes sense. I think the issue, though, or not the issue, but the tricky thing about it is it wasn't the full truth. It wasn't the full big picture perspective. It was only one sliver of that. I was looking at the tree, not the forest. And over time, what I've noticed, which I really like, is that now it's very apparent that when stuff like this comes up, legislation for Uber and Lyft and for rideshare drivers, it's now becoming more common that they're not just talking about a minimum wage. Although, of course, that's important. That's the headline. That's what grabs a lot of drivers' attention. Like, hey, you now are getting paid more per ride than you did before. You're guaranteed this now. But in addition, things like deactivation is now becoming a bigger talk. I think even like a couple years ago, no one ever talked about deactivation. It wasn't even feasible that would become a law. But now it is. That, like, say if a driver gets wrongfully deactivated, there can be repercussions on Uber and Lyft's end, or the driver has better protection or rights or stuff they can do where they're not just hung out to dry. And this happens. I know some, drivers, not some, but a lot, have commented on this channel saying, yeah, Mark, and it makes sense. I got deactivated and I couldn't drive for a week. I lost or missed out on a week's worth of work. And now every single time I go to drive, I'm worried. If I pull up that app, is it going to work? Or am I going to get a notice that I got deactivated again? If, like, say, I have a difficult passenger or a passenger that's just being really annoying or rude or whatever, I don't want to be worried once they leave my car if they're going to report me or make something up, which happens a lot, and now I get deactivated again. And that makes sense. That anxiety now is always there, which, as a side note, like I say in so many videos, make sure you sign up with both apps. Always do that. So I do have to say that. Got to say that, honestly. But I think this is huge that, again, it's another example of a state or city or area or legislative body winning against Uber and Lyft. It's a win for drivers. 2, I like the fact that these are pretty good terms, right? And 3, I like the fact that these terms not only include the minimum wage, but also the fact that it's including other things like insurance coverages and auto insurance coverages, right? Like in personal injury, like all these aspects that are just things that come along with being a rideshare driver, being an Uber driver and a Lyft driver, et cetera, et cetera. And what's big about this, I find as well, is when it comes to a lot of drivers, they want to say it's independent contractors. And this has been a very, very recurring theme through a lot of these videos I've done when I'm covering these news stories, that a lot of rideshare drivers want to be independent contractors. But also, there's, a lot of pros to being an independent contractor, also a lot of cons. And I think what's good about this is it does kind of give you the aspect of being an independent contractor with benefits. Like these terms, ignoring the minimum wage part, which, still, I guess, part of it, you do have these benefits now. And I said this before, that Uber and Lyft is continuing now, and the ride-sharing world is continuing to pave its way as being this unique category of independent contractor, but with benefits. And I think that is a sweet spot for most drivers, that you're getting all the benefits of being an independent contractor, flexible schedule, you can work however you want, whenever you want, taxes are not taken out initially, things like that. So that way, maybe some people might like that, some people might not. Depends on how you look at it from an accounting perspective. I don't want to stress, I'm a former accountant, but I'm not your accountant, right? But some people might like that, right? But anyway, you get the benefits of being an independent contractor, but now a lot of drivers are now getting the benefits of being an employee or getting employee. Let me word that better. You're getting employee-like benefits while still being able to drive how you're driving now. Now you're getting more money, better protection, and better rights. I'm glad this finally concluded because, like I said, I think the last time I did a video on this was in, I think like June or July of this year. Maybe, I think June or July. I can't remember the last time I covered this. And it was just a huge annoying thing where, they kept trying to extend the date when that minimum wage was going to happen, or that minimum hourly guarantee, or in this case, the minimum like amount for a certain amount of time and the miles, blah, blah, blah. They kept extending it. Uber and Lyft kept saying they were going to pull out. And then it was just annoying thing of this like back and forth, like I said, cat and mouse game of them being like, shoot, is this game of chicken, or who are we going to call their bluff, right? And for a while, I was like, wait a minute, what even happened to this Minneapolis case? Like, is it just done? Is it just in this weird limbo for the next 3 years where Uber and Lyft maybe tries to just push it back further and further, where drivers continue to get taken advantage of? And I'm glad that finally now this got put forward, right? And I know when I do a lot of these videos, sometimes, actually less frequent, but I know sometimes I do get comments, although they are less frequent over time, of drivers saying, hey Mark, this is great, but I don't drive in Minneapolis. Why do I care about this? And I said before in a bunch of other videos, and I'll say it again, which is maybe why those comments are less frequent. Remember that when something happens in one state or area, a lot of other people look at it, right? And this is now becoming a huge breadcrumb effect where a lot more places are now adding protection for drivers. And I think this is bigger as well than most people think on that note. Because when you look at California, it's like, yeah, California is arguably the biggest state for ride sharing. You have San Francisco and LA. I might even include San Diego, I guess, but more LA and San Francisco, especially San Francisco. And they're like, yeah, of course, California is massive. SF, LA, massive. And I might include SD, massive for ride sharing. They need protection because there's so much going on, so much activity. Same thing in New York, same thing in Massachusetts. But a place like Minneapolis is not as well populated and as active compared to LA or San Francisco, yet this still happened. And I think this is showing that obviously LA and New York, for example, are two of the biggest cities in the country. So it's one thing for a new ride-sharing policy to get put in place there. But now that it's getting put into place in more of like a smaller area compared to those, that is also a big sign that, like, say, other areas around the country could follow suit. Because I could see other areas in the country, and I've talked about this before in other videos, where I can see some areas in the country saying, hey, good for LA, good for San Francisco drivers, good for New York drivers, but we're not that big. We're not New York. We're not LA. Can we have the same financial concept? Can we get the same protections? Because we're just not as big as them. This is, I think, a big win for a smaller area that I think a lot more areas and legislative bodies can relate to, saying, okay, LA, we're not LA. We're not New York. We're not San Francisco. But we can relate more in terms of our economics, our traffic, our ride-sharing world. We can relate more to Minneapolis. Maybe we should follow suit. And so although, like I said, these comments have gotten less and less frequent because I think some drivers have noticed this trend, like I've been pointing out, again, that breadcrumb effect is now really starting to happen. And it's kind of cool because as we now approach and get into 2025, I can see next year being a big year with all these policies now getting more and more common and now being talked about more than ever before. I can see a lot of, hopefully, really positive things happening for rideshare drivers.